tonight to our Ray FFF Academy talk with Pradip Malde, one of our Ray artists. The theme tonight is imagination and truth. Oh, thank you. Our theme tonight is imagination and truth. It's really wonderful that we can have you back. We had a really energetic talk during the festival days, and it was quite impressive, the spirit that you bring with your work and the process. You're, of course, Pradip, you are represented in our exhibition with your work called The Third Heaven, which deals with the resilience of the Haitian people and how they deal with environmental catastrophes, but also catastrophes with when it comes to power and governments and people making decisions for human or inhuman causes. A little bit biographically, Pradip is a professor at the University of the South in Swanee, Tennessee, which is not so far where I grew up. And I've actually known him as a photographer and a friend for many years. We've co-curated together. You're, of course, quite a multi-talent, not only as a photographer, but as a professor at the University of the South. You are the director of the Haiti Institute, which I'm sure you will speak about in detail tonight of exactly what that is. And we are quite impressed with one of your newest achievements. Pradip is the recipient of the John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship this past year, which is a great recognition, one of the most important recognitions for anyone in the arts in the United States. I would like to thank at this point for our Academy and for the lectures that we're having this year in the Academy. Really quite happy because we've received ourselves a little stipend from the Fight Stiftung here in the Frankfurt area to be able to film some of our talks from our special guest. And so tonight we're being filmed with the company Film and More with Angela and Dennis. So that's the reason I'm kind of taking a few cues from them, because every time we do a talk, there's always different details that we have to take care of. Yes, I would like to give the word to you now, Pradip. Okay? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Selena. I just want to start, first of all, and continue in the sort of line of thinking that Selena has presented us with, which is to thank a lot of people here. It's a long list. So Selena said, just for now, please, just keep it short. There's a longer thank you coming. But really, to the FFF and to Ray 2018, it's a great team of people. And I think you're doing something incredibly important for the students who live in this area, but also for the broader photographic community, and also for the wider conversation about how photography fits into the landscape that is made up of art and culture, but the landscape that includes politics and activism, and ultimately, purpose. So we all have an understanding of photography as something that affects us when we think about the photos of our childhood, the photos of our families, but we tend to keep photography at a distance sometimes when we think about it in museums and art galleries. And I think that a topic like Extreme in Ray 2018 brings all of that together and makes us think about how this medium can be used for a reason. Okay? So I just want to say very briefly that today I'm going to talk about how imagination and truth fit into the work I do and into my thinking, and also how beauty acts as a connector across those two seemingly quite separate realms of thinking and understanding the world around us. So with that, I'm just going to play this.
Merci pour toute bagage, Seigneur. Merci pour toute bagage, Seigneur. Loué éternel. Loué soit l'éternel. Loué soit Jésus. 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 Béni soit l'éternel. Béni soit l'éternel. Gloire éternelle, gloire éternelle, gloire éternelle, gloire éternelle, que nous soit l'éternel. Je t'aime, nous va s'en merveille, 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 nous va s'en merveille. Louez l'éternel, louez l'éternel, béni soit l'éternel, béni soit l'éternel. Oui, nous péchés, la
So I began to visit Haiti in roundabout, the first time I went was in 2006. And this first visit, I'm going to talk about a little bit because it may act as a window into the way creative processes unfold. And I want to present this window because the creative process, we tend to think of artists always engaged in this, but we don't break it apart in a way that can be accessed by everyone enough, I think. And the way this creative process kicks in is through, for me, and I think for all of us really, through imagination, and then a feeling of how can I bring into the world something that will positively affect things around me. And I think that another way of thinking about that is hope. And if we consider imagination, so this is the whole body of the third heaven on one screen. And now in the next few slides, I'm going to just stream through sections of it. In total, it's about 160 to 170 photographs made over a period of about 6 to 7 years. All of them were taken in Haiti over many, many visits. I've lost count of how many visits I made. And all of them were made with the help of over 30 or 40 people. Nothing happens in the making of work just on your own. But one thing I do think happens in a much more singular way. If we think about the idea of a nucleus or a single cell in relation to an organism, or a molecule, if you will, or a multicellular structure. Okay. So just kind of put these two things in your mind, a single cell or an atom, and a multicellular organism or a molecule. If we consider imagination, I think imagination emanates. It just comes out. It comes out from a point source. It comes out like a nucleus or an atom, a spark of light. Now the question is not important that where does it come from? I don't think that matters, as much as that we begin to think about imagination as a manifestation of things that are beyond any of the processes or technologies or communication systems that we may ever use as human beings, right? So I'm not talking about God, I'm not talking about some cosmic oneness around the universe. I'm really talking about a phenomenon that happens. And I think if we look back on each of our lives and consider trying to find an instance like this, there'll be many. They come in our childhood, they happen day to day for us. It's constant. But I think of imagination as a point source, coming out. Okay? And I think of truth as something that is like a multicellular structure, that it is organic somehow. It's organic in this way. When people, let's say, begin to find an expression that comes from imagination and begin to agree with it, they have a concordance, a joint agreement about it, that's then assuming the power of truth. Oh yeah, all of us agree on the euro. Right? We agree on it. It creates this union. But the moment we disagree on it, as we may well soon, we have a problem. And it stops being the truth. Okay, so that's a silly example, I know, but quite an important one also. So this is the difference for me between imagination and truth. It's hard sometimes to begin to agree to an imagined process. It's hard to bring other people to thinking with your imagination, to accepting it. And I think that that's where beauty becomes an essential function. And we have a problem, especially in the arts, and especially in the relationship that the arts has with its benefactors, that beauty is often misperceived as an object, as a thing, as one experience that somehow is fixed. And I think beauty is very much a process. And it's a process that begins to pull together forces of the imagination and forces that are shaped by imagination into truth. Why I presented and began to think about the whole piece as a series of strips of images almost functioning like a film, a movie, cinematographic, sliding across our field of experience. There are point sources in it. There are single images that created access for me to a multiple kind of truth. And many times these truths were contradictory. Okay? For example, and I'm just going to change things a little bit now in my talk. I'm going to start talking more specifically about images, and I'm going to talk about the relationship between these images, and I'm going to keep coming back to this screen. So, at this point, if you have any part of the screen that you need me to talk about, please say so, and I'll go to it and we'll talk, okay? So, first I have to find my cursor. There we go. Okay, I'm going to start with this whole strip here. It's a section made up of 4 images. And one of the things that I experienced in Haiti has described by many people who touch on the whole Haitian situation in terms of resilience. It's been used in a lot of writing about my work, and it's true to a certain extent. The Haitian people are resilient. You walk into any place, you will find people who will find time to laugh, will find time to share their food with you, will survive. Okay? There's a sense of movement and hope for the future. But isn't that a basic human quality anyway? And my argument against the use of resilience in Haiti, I didn't understand until many years of working in there, is this, that when you are in a corner, when you're pushed into a corner again and again and again, okay, that's not resilience. If you survive in this corner and the world keeps beating up on you, that's not resilience. And fighting back isn't resilience either. What is resilience is understanding that you can actually move along the wall until you find a corner, and then you can leave or move on, right? That's resilience. So if we think about resilience as an epigenetic function, if we think about how, for example, this young child was shelling peas in her family garden, and that family had been allowed access to fresh water, a special latrine toilet system that would keep their waste products separate in a healthy way, and also recyclable in a really healthy way. They were learning techniques to preserve their soil, and also the mother was being taught how to prepare the food so that her children would remain healthy. They were growing enough food to pay, by going to market, to pay for her to keep going to school. Okay? So what's happened in this one photograph for me was that the system that created problems before could be broken out of. The walls that were stopping these people from moving forward were not removed, but they were shown. And by being shown, they could find a way out of the corner. Okay? So in my thinking, photographer and image maker, I didn't go to Haiti to say, okay, I'm going to find pictures about this. That doesn't work. What I did think was, first I recognized the experience, and then I let it sit in my being, okay? And then, as I began to photograph, sensing these little sparks of imagination that were giving me access to the kinds of truths that I was beginning to perceive that other people were also experiencing. So this helps me illustrate something very important, that imagination and truth actually can go both ways. There can be a truth, and we can imagine something out of it. And there can be an imagination that we can manifest as truth later on, as more and more people subscribe to it. So this is just one of those series that begins to illustrate that. Okay, whoops, sorry, I touched the wrong part of the screen there. Okay, and then I want to talk about this sequence here as well. So this sequence, like many other sequences that I've put up on the wall and in this whole piece, had some titles, but the titles are just there as reminders rather than being intrinsic parts of the whole expression. The label for this series is called Somnambulists, Sleepwalkers. Okay. Now you may or may not know, and I think this was Kao Fei in her talk 2 weeks ago, was talking about zombies. And one of her pieces, it's featured a lot, the idea of the zombie. You may not know that, and I don't think she did, I wish I'd had the opportunity to talk to her about it, that zombies manifested in Haiti as a part of voodoo culture. And there are zombies. It's not a mystical thing. The voodoo priests, some of them know how to concoct, how to mix up a potion made up of various kinds of poisons that can put a person into a semi-comatose state. And combining that with belief, truth, and fear, you can end up really controlling a person. Right? But what I saw on the streets in Haiti, in that moment between moments, so a photographer learns quickly that unlike what Henri Cartier-Bresson said, there is a most critical moment, a moment that is most potent in a sequence of events, a perfect graphic arrangement, a perfect expression, all of that, where something significant is happening and only in that moment, which is true to a certain extent. But unlike that, I was looking for the moment where nothing important was happening, or little important was happening, at least in the people's being, okay, that I was photographing. And they end up looking like they're sleepwalking. But this is a state that I kept coming across many times, again and again and again. And I find this particular sequence very, very depressing to look at, but also very beautiful. Okay. And the third set I want to talk about as a way of illustrating this idea of the strange relationship between truth and imagination and beauty is this set here. I'm just going to go back to this. So truth is a really strange thing for me, I think for all of us. When we think about where zones of conflict occur in human relations, they frequently occur when one group of people disagree with another group of people about what one or both consider as the truth. So all of us have a lot of experience with conflicting truths. Oh yeah, that's your version of the story is one way of conflicting the truth. But rights to land, for instance, belief systems in religion, all of these have led to a lot of conflict. What we tend to forget sometimes is why is it that we keep holding on to the idea of absolute truths while constantly being confronted by the reality that there are many forms of the same truth. There are many frameworks through which we can approach any given one truth, if you will. If we all agree that human life matters, why can't we agree on the same way of preserving human life? We can't seem to do that. And when I was in Haiti, I kept coming up against this many, many times. And one of the strangest things was that I found that people were making sacrifices all the time. This is a very peculiar instance of that. So there's a place in Haiti called Kanj, and on a hill slope, a big organization over about 15 years began to build a hospital. And the hospital is now has moved location, but it is quite famous. It is known to be the best and biggest hospital in Haiti. It's run by an organization called Partners in Health. They're based in Boston. When it was here, they had to scrape out a hill slope, put buildings on it, make it perfect with cement. They preserve the landscape as much as possible, but the truth of it is that the cement is destroying the trees, and you need the trees in order to maintain the environment. but people needed the hospital. And you need to have clean dirt, clean walkways, clean access to the hospital to keep these people going. Okay. The other problem was that when this hospital was built, it was the only one in a hinterland, a larger area of about 1 million people. Okay. And these people had, since 1950, moved up into the hills because the Haitian government in the early 1950s had built a dam where they used to live to create a hydroelectric system to provide electricity for the factories in the capital city of Haiti called Port-au-Prince. The people were moved off their land, they lost their land. The only place they could go was up into the mountains. The only way the young people could bring money back into the homes was to go into the big city, Port-au-Prince, to find employment, where actually they ended up with alcoholism, prostitution, low payment for their work, essentially slave labor. Okay. And then the women who caught AIDS were so sick that they had to go back to their homes. The men and women who got tuberculosis also got so sick that they went back into the mountains. And between late 1950s to about 1965, through the bad application of medicine by non-governmental organizations coming into Haiti to say, oh, we got to help these poor people. Here, take some drugs, you'll be fine. And then leaving, and the next group would come in and do the same. Over a period of about 10 years, this part of Haiti, the mountains, was loaded, riddled with multi-drug resistant tuberculosis and AIDS. Crazy, right? And the situation also was made worse because there was no infrastructure, no water, no road structure, etc. So that's where the hospital was built. Okay. Now you've got a huge demand, lots of people walking sometimes for 2 or 3 days through the mountains to come to the hospital to get treatment. There was a really good treatment system put in place by partners in health, and it was very successful. And then in 2010 came the Haitian earthquake. The Haitian earthquake was so damaging because there was no government supervision of how buildings were built. So now you have a whole nation that's falling, right? I'm going to go back and show you another strip. Okay, sorry, I just lost my track here a little bit. Now, when the earthquake happened, a lot of donations began to come into Haiti, a lot. And people wanted to here we go, let's do it this way. So much money came in to Partners in Health that the organization had to build a bigger hospital, which is now true. It's there, it exists. It's a training hospital as well. But the old hospital had to shut down because it was on a hill. It couldn't sustain a much bigger structure. And now guess what? There are over 1 million people without a hospital because of the earthquake. So what this highlights is, What this highlights is that there is a deep problem that goes way beyond, or the sources and the causes of it go way beyond Haiti itself. That the way non-governmental organizations engage with poorer countries than the ones we live in actually could be dangerous. why do they exist? Well, the reasons for that have to do with the ending of the Cold War. And why did that happen? Well, because the greatest powerful nations on earth were only really engaged, or largely engaged, in meaningful aid activity because they were competing with each other for access to power systems. Okay? So there are deeper politics involved than simply ones about being good to other human beings. So all I want to do really is to point out how complex this is. Haiti's history is a very, very complicated one. Okay? And Haiti is the way it is, not because of some intrinsic quality in the people of Haiti. Haiti is, after all, the second oldest republic in the Western Hemisphere. It's about 30 years younger than the United States of America. There is no reason why it should not be in a better way than it is. Okay. Well, there are some reasons why it's been kept that way. The United States found it very dangerous and unacceptable that a nation right on its doorstep had emancipated itself from slavery. That nation had written into its code, into its government, into its policies, that land will no longer be owned by white people, that it could only be owned by blacks. And that's the beginning of the trouble with Haiti. Okay. So I'm hoping that by just putting this slide up and leaving it floating out there, there'll be questions that will help us extend this conversation in a minute. What I want to do now, because it's very hot, I know it's hard to kind of stay alert. What I want to do now is actually to switch to and jump forward to something quite different. Or maybe it's not that different. I want to show you what I'm doing right now. Whoops. So Selena mentioned that I recently received a Guggenheim Award, and it was for work I'd actually begun over a year ago. With my Haiti work, which is just one of many different things that I've worked on for over 30 years, I've also done a lot of thinking and work about what it means to be a citizen, and what we sacrifice when we become citizens. I think these are necessary sacrifices. I'm not criticizing what a government gives us, and I'm not criticizing completely what communities give us when we say, I'm going to become a member of this. To be a member, I have to make a sacrifice. But I do think that there are certain kinds of behaviors that we do that we need to question very carefully and criticize. And some of them have to do, especially when it comes to interpersonal behaviors, tight relationships between mother and father and children, father and children, lovers, these kinds of really tight circles, that it is time to try and reimagine these things a little bit or to question them. So the work I'm doing right now in Tanzania is actually much more than what you will see. The work is called From Where Loss Comes, and it's the photographs, they're all done with an 8x10 camera and printed in platinum palladium. And so this is a photograph of Carolina Francis behind her aunt here, who is in the front, Julia Kalungwama. And both of them are retired cutters. They cut female genital parts. Okay. And the work I'm doing is about female genital cutting and mutilation practices. It's not an anthropological survey. It's not a hard-hitting documentary revelation about a horrific practice. It's more a building of an experience that I can take to other people that will help us try and question, how does this practice matter to all of us? To put it another way, where in me does this come from? Okay. So this is a photograph of Margaret Gallia, and she's a retired cutter also. The name for a cutter is Ngariba. And she's sitting underneath the tree that she always did this practice on young girls. Now, in the place that I'm working, these practices, about somewhere between 30 to 50% of women are cut. It's in Tanzania, and the distribution of female genital cutting goes from sort of in the 20% zone of women cut in Western Sub-Saharan Africa, all the way to 98% in the Horn of Africa, up near Somalia and sections of Eritrea and Ethiopia. It's a really, really widespread practice. And it ranges from a mild process that has more of a cosmetic kind of effect to almost a life-threatening process where women have to be treated, if they're to survive, in a Western operating theater with some both superficial and deep surgery. But the question remains, why do this? Especially, why is it that mothers want their daughters to have this done to them? From our point of view, our first response in the West is to say this is bad. Second response is, oh, this is, some weird religious traditional thing, and it has to be stopped. From their point of view, this may or may not be bad. They may get the logic and the data about it. These are some tools that you're seeing that are used for cutting. Yeah. So these are tools recovered by my colleagues in Tanzania, particularly an amazing activist called Sarah Mwaga, that are recovered from cutters who have said they will no longer do this. Right? They've retired as such, and they hand over all their tools, and they agree to engage in conversations that will change these practices into something less harmful. And the tools are about this big. They're quite small. Okay. And that upper edge is sharpened very carefully and then used to cut. But what I heard many times from the mothers, from the cutters, was that, yeah, if our daughters are to belong to the community, they're going to be cut. If they're to have strong economic futures, have a good husband, have property, they have to be cut. And if you don't get cut, you're not going to be part of the community. So for me, the biggest question then is, how else does this manifest? I know that in the university I teach in, it's men and women in this university, they have this strange thing that seems to happen more in the USA than anywhere else, called the Greek system. It's a series of social clubs that I didn't understand when I first went to America, but it's social clubs that men and women belong to. And it's usually, almost always now, segregated by sex or gender. And the men and women are put through a rite of passage. Right? And the extent to which this happens varies, but in some cases it's very dangerous. It's almost life-threatening. The same happens in the military, in the armed forces. You go through this rite of passage in order to belong, in order to create bonds so profound and so great that you will give your life, if necessary, for another. This is a goatskin pad that's about half that size that the girls sit on when they're cut. And this is another really amazing woman, an activist called Raheli Hezronim Sagala, who is actually simulating face markings that she would put on before she went into the cutting ceremony for the girls. And she's one of the key people in the team that I've been allowed to work with, who is rewriting the rituals for transition from girlhood to womanhood. Right? So instead of cutting, they're saying we can do some other things now that are healthier and even better for the community. Because one of the side effects of cutting is that it actually affects the economic health and well-being of the whole community. When a woman gets ill as a mother, when her life expectancy is reduced because of these cutting practices, which often happens, now you've got a community that has been compromised. So this is another portrait of Raheli. And this is Aziza, who is also retired. Now, by the way, I use this term retired because legally, they're not allowed to do any more cutting. The government in Tanzania has, this is a banned practice. So they have to tell me that they are retired. So, and this is her most preferred cutting tool. She was showing that to me. And this is just the edge of a blade that is used, the traditional cutting tool. And then this one village, amazing women, really amazing women, said to me, we're going to take you out. We're going to simulate a tribal cutting ceremony. Okay? And so they did. They took me to the riverside, allowed me to photograph. And this is one of those photographs. They didn't actually cut, they were simulating the whole thing, but it was difficult. This is a jar that contains some medicinal dust. After making the cut, it was put on. Some trees where the cutting ceremonies are performed in a small village called Mundemu. A hut where, in another village, which was used for cutting. This is a container which contains some of the powders that they use for the cutting rituals. And I want to finish with two pictures. This one is a portrait of Jazira Ramadani in her home. And she's now okay, but she had gone through 3 cutting procedures and then a final 4th Western surgery to correct all the problems that she had because of the cuttings that happened. And she is a mother of 3 children now and is doing okay. And finally, this is a photograph of Julia Ivan, who is here. And then in the front is Sarah Christoms, who's reaching out to her mother, who's just outside the door, and Raheli, who I've photographed before. And her mother, young Sarah's mother, had agreed that she would not cut her daughter. And it was a big deal in the village. And it was really important that her decision was supported by ex-cutters, that they also said, we're not going to do this. And it stood as an example, and that whoops, you okay? And that one kind of situation began to change other people's decisions about cutting in that village. I'm going to stop there for a minute. Are there questions? We can put the lights up if you want. Yeah.
I would like to know if the cutter, is it a real profession where you get money, a salary every month?
It varies from village to village, but yes, they get paid. And they get paid not from some big agency, they get paid by the family that brings the girl, their daughter, to be cut. So, yes, it's a profession. And it's always a woman in this part of the world. There are other communities that I've heard of in Congo and Central Africa where the cutters are also men. In this community, the men largely are not involved. They're not allowed when the women are doing a cutting ceremony, for example. But the practice changes from region to region. There's no one specific approach. But certainly the thing that is common is that there is some kind of an exchange. So it's hard when you have powerful people within a community, the cutters, and they are powerful, who are being asked to stop something that they are professional in, that they actually gain a lot of power from. Yeah.
But why are they so powerful? Are they kind of magicians or?
Yeah, so in some cases it's the belief system again, right? So the village thinks, oh, if they can cut my daughter, then they have powers, and then they don't say, no, I don't have powers. They say, okay, I can heal you or whatever. So many times there's crossovers between them functioning as healers, as sort of priests, if you will, and also as cutters. Sometimes it's quite separate. In one case I found that there was just really, this woman was a cutter. Now, it's become complicated because of this fundamental disconnect between democratic government that is meant to be humanitarian, right? It values the health of women, for instance, and tribal practices, which somehow relate to something far more, at least for the tribe, than the government and what the law says. But if the law requires the cutter to stop cutting, then to the public outside of the tribe, the cutter will always say, yeah, I don't cut anymore. But my colleague Sarah Mwaga, who has a non-governmental organization about this matter, she's always monitoring data in hospitals. And she said that in the last 5 years, she's been working for over 20 years and noticed a steady reduction in the cutting practices. And then over the last 5 years, she's seen an increase. And she was puzzled, but one of the reasons why she's seen an increase is that she's stopped just doing anecdotal data collection and is looking at records in birthing wards in hospitals, okay, where mothers come to give birth. And there, the hospital doctors are required to note down if they see signs of female genital cutting in the mother. And they're seeing a lot of signs of that. But most interestingly, and perhaps sadly, they're seeing a rise in the number of mothers under the age of 21 who have cutting in them, right? So the practice of cutting was declared illegal about 22 years ago. And there are children who were cut after that. So it's become quite secret, you know, and that's the biggest problem now. Yeah. 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 Thank you.
The idea of the social value of cutting in the collective is very interesting.
Yes.
Cutting is just one example of these rituals or something to be part of the collective. And you told us that they try to integrate different forms of ritual to be still a part of the collective or to have the feeling to be part of the collective. And not getting cut. So what kind of rituals, different rituals, do they try to integrate?
I don't know enough details about that. That's the next thing that I'm going to find out about in 5 weeks' time when I go back. But the one thing they told me was that they're trying to, and this is a conversation that's in, the whole thing is in process right now. So the one thing they told me was that they're trying to get the communities to define those practices. And it's a crucial point because if it comes from the outside, it's not going to stick, you know? And many times there are monetary sort of connects in all of this. So money is paid to the cutter, but also presents and gifts are promised to the girls. Oh, you're going to do the ceremony and you'll get a radio, your own radio, or, you know, headphones or something crazy, you know. So how the community negotiates through all of this, and it's not going to be enough to say, we'll have a big birthday party on your 12th birthday, which is the age when most of the cutting happens, you know. So yeah, the practice is going to change a lot, but I'm not sure if it's going to be something that is specific to every village, or if it is something organized so well that it's accepted across the whole region. But it's certainly, this region that we're working in is, has about, it's huge, it's about 6 million people that this non-governmental organization has an effect on. It's a big organization, and they're still bewildered about how exactly they're going to make it happen for everybody. They've had some great successes through people like the Gariba I showed you, but it's very specific and very much, in this one case, the village that showed me the demonstration of their cutting practice, they actually sang and danced all the way to the river, right? And to me, it was such an exhilarating, beautiful experience that I said, are you going to keep this? And they said, of course, no matter what we do, we're not going to let go of this music of ours that goes back many generations. I said, well, what does the music mean? And they said, it's funny. The songs are really funny. And there were things like, so now, it's simple to us, right? But so now you're going to become a woman. Now you're going to grab a man between your legs. Now you're going to do this. Now you're going to do that. You know, but it was funny and at the same time very, very poignant. You know? So, yeah.
Okay, sorry. Pradip, I mean, maybe we failed to mention, but I think most people know that you were actually born in Tanzania. I mean, you moved with your family in the 70s to Great Britain. But besides that point, how are you accepted? I mean, here you are, a professor of photography, being able to go and witness this very intimate and very traditional ceremony. I mean, how long did it take for you to be able to get access, or give maybe a little bit of the process? And yeah.
Thanks. I think that's a very important issue for anybody working outside of their communities. So yes, I am an outsider. I was born in Tanzania, but you know, I'm an Asian Tanzanian as opposed to a black Tanzanian, and sometimes that is also a big zone of separation. I only started on this about a year ago. I'd been doing some research before that on a previous trip, so 2 years at the most. And when I went, I had my one connect, which was Sarah Mwaga. And I spent a lot of time saying to, asking Sarah, you know, what can we do together rather than me having an agenda? I wanted her to tell me her story and why she started this non-governmental organization. So a lot of it has to do with listening and taking time. The other part is, this sounds weird, but I almost have to let go of my ego, right? That I think that you have, it's like not having an agenda, saying time doesn't matter, saying what I know doesn't matter anymore. All that matters is that my ability to listen and to mirror people around me and to use my technical equipment in a way, all of these have to be very transparent. I have to know them all so well that they don't come in the way. And I think of, sometimes I think of what I am and what I know about myself as a process, right? It's technical in a way. You know, each one of us knows our habits. We like to brush our teeth in a certain way, and we need food at a certain time, and we like some kinds of people, and you know, the list is long. We think of that as personality, but I think that if we change that a little bit and say, okay, these are the things in me that I can constantly question and I can change. And if I can change them, I can also make them go into the background at times like this. So with working with them, that helped a lot. That I'm a man took me by surprise. I expected a lot of resistance, and what Sarah did with everybody she introduced me to, she kept introducing me, and the term brother in Kiswahili and in the native language there means something more than, or something beside just a blood sibling, right? So she kept introducing me as Brother Pradip, and I think that mattered a lot as well, that she had trust in me. Yeah, so those are some of the things. I do think that the technical part cannot be stressed enough, because there are photographers in this group. You have to learn to make your equipment invisible. It's really hard when you're working with an 8x10 camera, you know, because this thing has to be, it's bigger than those two cameras combined. I mean, it's big, and it sits on a tripod, and you have to kind of make people feel comfortable with that. But it's possible, I think, and much of it has to do with just sitting down with them, being with them, letting them know that you're there to listen rather than to take. So, yeah. Other questions? Yes?
I would like to know what motivates you to work, and are you free in choosing your subjects or projects or whatever?
I'm free to do what I want. It's really great. Because I teach at a university, I'm a professor, I have the means to do what I want, okay? Which is really nice. But there is a price for that as well. One difficult thing is, because with freedom of that kind, you are always concerned about what you're going to do, right? Okay, what shall I do? I can do anything. What shall I do? Where shall I begin? I tell my students something I believe in very strongly. There's only one thing you can do. In your whole life, there's really only going to be one thing. Okay? And there's my favorite story, there's a movie called City Slickers. It came out in America a long time ago, and it's about these cowboys or these city guys, like bankers, you know, in New York City, and they want an experience of a lifetime, so they go down into the Wild West. They've never ridden a horse or anything like that, and they've signed up for this special kind of tourist holiday where they go with a real cowboy and they take real cattle and they move them in a cattle kind of transport, right, across the country, yee-haw, you know, doing all this stuff, to the railway station. And they have to go for 1,000 miles or something. A cattle drive. Well, their cowboy dies during the cattle drive. he's like sitting there taking his last breath, you know, and Billy Crystal, the main actor, goes up and says, "You can't leave us, we don't," they're still trying to get on their horses and falling on the other side and all this crazy stuff. They're really green. And he says, "You can't leave us." And he realizes this guy's dying. It's Lee Marvin. And he says, okay, just tell me the most important thing I need to know. And so this dying man says, "Just one thing." And then he dies. So I really think that with all my work, I've been just trying to do one thing. It takes different kinds of faces, but it's the same thing. It's this current work is the most important work I'm doing right now, that I've ever done. It's about loss, and it's about love. And I think all of us know this, that if you're going to love, you're going to lose something. And if you're going to lose something, you're going to love something. It goes both ways. So all of my work has been about that. And I've done work about citizenship. I've done a lot of work in Haiti and Jamaica, and I've done a lot of still life work, which was shown here many years ago as well. That's essentially about that, the relationship between memory and love and balance. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Okay. Yes, yeah.
Why are you so drawn to topics that are kind of heavy?
Yeah. They are, you're right. So it's because of the experience of the beautiful, you know. And I really do think that we have a very complex existence, and to have just the light seems a little bit less accessible to me than to find the light in something that is dark, you know? And I don't know, it's probably a personality thing, but that's the reason. I just have an easier time when I try and find light through darkness than when I try and just find lightness or find darkness through lightness. In fact, lightness through darkness, or darkness through lightness is, I think, the cynical approach, you know, the sort of satirical approach, and really good humor. And I'm not very good at all of that. I prefer the quieter ache, you know? Yeah. So, yeah. And I also think, I'll say there's a photographic reason for that, too, that there is magic that happens in darkness for photographers, you know, especially wet process photographers. And that's how I learned about photography. I work with everything from an 11x14 camera to an iPhone. I don't have a problem with that separation that many people think of between wet traditional processes and digital modern processes. I think they both become a wonderful combination now. But darkness is really an important part of the camera process, you know, and I like that. So, yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you.
That's a great, from the
So,
darkness into the lightness. Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Pradip. It was quite wonderful.
Thank you very much as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Tomorrow, Pradip will be giving a workshop here at the Photography Forum, 2 days. If you're interested, please let us know. And his...
Do you want to say something about what we'll do?
Yeah, why don't you do that? That'd be great.
So we're going to have a lot of fun, and you can come with anything. You can come with your iPhone if you want, you know. It's what this workshop is going to be about is having you figure out ways, even if you know everything about photography and you have amazing work, what I'm really going to try and work on with you is your path between absolutely the ordinary, the everyday photograph, and the big work that you're going to do out there, right? And I'm hoping to take it from that chance photograph that you'll make in the first half hour of the workshop tomorrow morning and connect it all the way to the most important photographic work you're ever going to do in your life. That's my task. I hope I do it in 24 hours. So.
That's quite an offer. Too bad we don't have the. So yes, and if there's any students that would like to take the class, we do have a few sort of special prizes for students. So if you want to think spontaneously about that, you can talk to us tonight. So thanks again, and have a great evening.